Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Providence, where we love beyond belief. Welcome to this very, very special evening. We are so excited for this presentation that is part of a larger journey of awareness and learning and reckoning that the First Unitarian Church of Providence has embarked upon. Some years ago, we began to realize that we had a lot of uncovered history that we needed to begin to deal with. And the more we uncovered it, the more we needed to do. So this has been already a many-year process of researching and understanding, and it's going to take us many more years to finish even just, I think, the beginning of the journey we've embarked on. But we started it knowing that it was not something that would be done in months or even just a few years, and it's not something that the church does as an institution. It's really something that all of us do together. And our journeys are uneven and authentic and essential, and they proceed at different rates. And the more we do it, and the more we do it together, the further we get. So evenings like this are really critical to our development and understanding as human beings trying to live as well as we can the lives we are given, and also as a congregation working to be faithful to what we believe. So with all of that, this is a really powerful and important moment. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome everybody here as the senior minister of the church. I'm so humbled to be serving a church that is willing to do such courageous and important and difficult work. We love our church, and we don't want to know that there is such ugliness as part of the heritage of this community that is now for us such a source of solace. But there's no other way forward than to recognize the things that are hard. There's nothing to be afraid of in recognizing the things that are hard. I think really the only thing to be afraid of is refusing to engage with what's hard. And that has never been the Unitarian Universalist way, and it isn't now. So without further ado, there's a series of introductions. I'm so honored to welcome the Reverend, hey guys, to welcome the Reverend Peter Larman, who is a member of this congregation, a wonderful leader in this congregation, a leader nationally in social justice and racial justice work for most of his life. We are so blessed and lucky to have you among us now as co-chair of our Owning Our History team that is helping to lead and guide this congregation in their work. So without further ado, Peter Larman.
Thank you, Reverend Liz, and thank you all. This is, as Reverend Liz just said, an incredible evening. When I first heard that my colleague and friend Tracy Picard had made connections with Brandon Nightingale, I couldn't sleep. I was so excited. I couldn't sleep because, you know, in our historical work here, we had found Nightingales who went to Georgia, one to Tennessee, and we knew something about their activities, but not a whole lot. So Brandon, having worked in the other direction, is for all of us going to fill out that picture tonight in a magnificent way. We always begin with thank yous, and I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Preservation Society and the Ruth Simmons Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, without whom we couldn't have done this program. I also want to particularly thank the members of the church, the volunteers and staff who stepped up to do a lot of work, hospitality work, the tech team, the Owning History team, who are all pretty much all here tonight. Our wonderful sextons. I mean, it is a team effort, and it's deeply gratifying that we can do things this ambitious. I also want to say that before leaving this evening, after the presentation, we invite you to go to our church parlors. There's a reception there, a wonderful reception laid out for you. There's also an exhibit. There are also copies of the book that we did on the history of the church available for you there. You wouldn't want to miss at least having a peek in that direction. Tracy will introduce our speaker, but before she does so, I think we need to have, and we will have, a word from our dear partner from the Providence Preservation Society. Would you please step forward, Marisa Angel Brown.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks to Reverend McClay and Reverend Larman for organizing tonight's program with us and the Simmons Center at Brown. I'm Marissa, the Executive Director of Providence Preservation Society. If you don't know our work, we'll be having our 70th anniversary next year. PPS was founded in 1956 by a really committed group of civic leaders who wanted to work hard both publicly and behind the scenes to make sure that Providence remains the place that many of us all love. The work we do includes historic preservation. It also includes research, education, advocacy. We work really hard to make sure that planning decisions in the city have deep and meaningful community engagement, and we're doing trades training as well as part of our education. I just wanted to say, before saying some words about Tracy and also Brandon, how we at PPS, coming up on our own 70th anniversary, are looking at the work that you here have been doing with the Owning Our History project. It is always, I think most historians know, it is much easier to think critically about other people's histories than it is to think critically about your own history. It takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of resources often, dedication. I think the knowledge you all are producing is really important in the city, but I also think that you're creating a model for how other institutions, organizations like PPS, as we think about our anniversary coming up, really need to do some reckoning as well with institutional histories that all of us have been a part of. I'm excited. I just wanted to say some words about Tracy because I'm not introducing her, but I get to talk in front of her, right before her. Tracy is a dear friend, and she'll get to introduce Brandon, but I also just wanted to recognize the work that Tracy has done, is doing, that really deeply, radically is changing the history of Providence. She has done it in such a short amount of time. I feel in a lot of ways like she's already produced a lifetime of research. And anyone who knows Tracy knows that she's at it every single day, including Saturdays and Sundays. So I just want to say, as someone who lives in Providence, loves Providence, the work is so important, and we're all so grateful to you for the work that you do and how you do it. So Brandon, yes, I love that. Brandon, before Tracy introduces you, I just wanted to thank you as well, similarly, for the work you are doing, that you'll share with us tonight. Welcome to our community. The work that you're kind of contributing, along with so many people in this room, really changes the way we think about our local history. That is, as you said, decades long, took hundreds of years to create some of the received stories about the past, and it may take hundreds more to make these kinds of important corrections, but thank you for the work that you do as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you all here. You could be anywhere tonight, and you chose to come here to listen to our special guest, Brandon Nightingale. I've had the huge pleasure of spending a couple of days with Brandon, made him go all over Providence and look at this house and look at that river and look at this plaque. And it's been wonderful. And I'm just so thankful and appreciative of all of you and to PPS and the Unitarian Church and the Simmons Center, and especially to Brandon. Before I give his intro, I just want to say something boring, which is that if you all have questions, please put them on index cards. Those will be collected so that I can kind of read quickly and maybe synthesize some to make sure we get through and get in there to party. So, who is our speaker today? Brandon Nightingale. Historian, archivist, and PhD student in history at Howard University. where he also serves as the Senior Project Manager for the Black Press Archives Digitization Project at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center. Brandon earned his bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in public history from the University of Central Florida. He then went on to complete a master's in library and information science from Florida State. He previously served as a university archivist at Bethune-Cookman University, where he worked to preserve and interpret the history of one of the nation's most storied HBCUs. In addition to his academic and archival leadership, Brandon has spent the last 7 years conducting genealogical research, helping friends and families connect with their ancestors and loved ones. His doctoral research at Howard explores the history of Black archives and the press across the African diaspora. Brandon is also, as if that's not enough, is also an active participant in professional conferences, public history initiatives. He's bridging scholarship, archival practice, and community dialogue. I'm so happy that he's here with us tonight, and I'm so happy that you're all here as well. Please join me in welcoming Brandon Nightingale to Unitarian Church.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Nightingale, and I'm honored to be here to share my talk, Entangled Histories, the Nightingales of Providence, and the Legacy of Slavery. I just want to say that, this work is truly guided, and in what I do, just in life in general, I really believe is guided by my ancestors. So none of this stuff is by coincidence for me. The purpose of today's presentation is to explore how my family's history, the Nightingales, connects the histories of Providence, the First Unitarian Church of Providence, the Atlantic slave economy, and Black communities that later formed on Cumberland Island, Georgia. First, I would like to express my deepest thanks to the Ruth J. Simmons Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice at Brown University, the First Unitarian Church of Providence, and the Providence Preservation Society for co-sponsoring today's event. And I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Tracy, whose work as a public historian and community memory worker who first reached out to me in 2022. It's incredibly meaningful to me that 3 years later, we are here together in this historic space to reflect on these stories. So can we give Tracy another hand, please? Standing here in the First Unitarian Church of Providence, I'm reminded that this space is not only a sanctuary, but also a witness to centuries of entangled histories of faith, commerce, slavery, and resistance. Much of what we know about the deep ties between this congregation and the Atlantic world of slavery is illuminated in the book, A Church in a Triangle by Peter and Tracy, who are, of course, with us today. Their work makes clear that families like the Nightingales were not peripheral figures, but central to both the spiritual and economic life of this congregation. Joseph Nightingale, for example, rose to prominence during the Revolutionary era and was a benefactor of this church, even as his household in Providence included enslaved people. His wife, Elizabeth Corliss Nightingale, was active here in the church life, her baptism by immersion standing out as a curious departure from congregational custom. Joseph's brother, John Clark Nightingale, carried the family's wealth southward when he married Catherine Katie Littlefield Green Miller, the daughter of Nathaniel Green, acquiring plantations and enslaved laborers on Georgia's coast, including on Cumberland Island, the place to which my own research ultimately led me. This church stood at the intersection of these worlds, pews filled by merchant families whose fortunes were built on the triangular trade. Rum distilled in Providence, enslaved people transported across the Atlantic, molasses brought back from the Caribbean, an economy that intertwined with the very foundations of this congregation. So to stand here today and to trace my own family story back through these entanglements is to see how the legacies of commerce, religion, and slavery converged in this very space. It is a history, not abstract or distant, but rooted in the streets around this church and in the names inscribed on my own family tree. Just a little bit about myself, because this is a part of the journey. I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida, but my roots are in St. Mary's, Georgia, by way of my father. That family connection to the coastal Georgia region, and especially to nearby Cumberland Island, one of the largest of the sea islands, of the barrier sea islands, is what first sparked my curiosity about how my family's story fit into this broader history. As you heard from Tracy earlier, I earned my BA in history, an MA in public history from the University of Central Florida, followed by a master's in library science from Florida State University. These experiences gave me the skills to research, interpret, and share complex historical stories. In 2017, I interned at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which deepened my understanding of how archives can bring forward the voices people often left out of traditional narratives. From 2020 to 2022, I served as the archivist at Bethune-Cookman University, which was started by Mary McLeod Bethune, a woman that I, had the utmost respect for, where I learned firsthand how archives preserve fragile community histories and empower future research. And since 2022, I've been at Howard University, pursuing my PhD in history and managing the Black Press Archives, the largest collection of Black newspapers in the world. That work has strengthened my skills in connecting personal family history to broader archival research and national narratives. This combination of personal roots in coastal Georgia, academic training at UCF and FSU, and professional archival experience has guided my approach to tracing the Nightingale's journey and connecting it to the history of places like Cumberland Island. The next part of this story is about the name itself, Nightingale. So on the screen, you'll see the Nightingale family coat of arms, which dates back to medieval England. The surname originally referred to the songbird and was often given as a nickname to people with a pleasant voice or cheerful nature. For me, the name carries mixed emotions. All my life, people have admired. I often hear compliments like, "That's such a beautiful name." But as I learned more about my family's history, I realized I can't separate the name from the legacies of slavery and displacement. I know this wasn't a name my ancestors chose for themselves. It was a name they carried because of enslavement and economic systems that shaped the Atlantic world. That realization complicates what many see as a simple, elegant name. Growing up, even as a kid, people would ask me, "Are you related to Florence Nightingale?" And I never really knew how to respond to that. To this day, I don't know much about the famous nurse, but I can say this with confidence. The best nurse I've ever known is my mother, Angela Nightingale. She's been a registered nurse for over 30 years. So when I think about the Nightingale name, I think about these layers, the compliments I still receive, the history that ties it to systems of oppression, and the personal meaning it holds in my own family. This afternoon, I gave a talk at the Nightingale Brown House, and we were gathered there in that space. It's important to recognize the history of that space. The house was built in 1792 for Joseph Nightingale, a wealthy Providence merchant whose business dealings, including at least 2 slaving voyages, helped finance its construction. Enslaved people lived and labored in this household both on Water Street and here on Benefit Street. The current name of the house reflects later ownership by the Brown family, whose own wealth was deeply tied to the transatlantic slave trade. In 2018, and that's from the brochure here, the John Nicholas Brown Center commissioned a report by Joanne Pope Mellish and released the brochure Slave Labor and the Making of the Nightingale Brown House, which documented these histories and encouraged public acknowledgement of them. Although the brochure is no longer posted online, it remains a valuable resource for understanding how this home embodies both architectural elegance and the legacy of slavery. Speaking here today connects my journey of uncovering the Nightingale's family ties to slavery with the very walls built on the labor and suffering of enslaved people. To understand my family story, we start here in Providence with Joseph Nightingale, the wealthy merchant who built this house in 1792. His wealth was tied to commerce connected to the transatlantic slave trade, and records show at least 9 enslaved people lived in his household in the late 18th century. Many likely moved with the family into that home. Among them were individuals like Quam Nightingale, who purchased his freedom in 1790, Nimble Nightingale, freed in 1798, names that remind us of the human lives behind this history. After Joseph's death, his son, John Clark Nightingale, continued the family's involvement in slavery. In 1800, he financed the slaving voyage of the brig Ida, during which 69% of the 162 captive Africans died during the Middle Passage. Later, John Clark moved to South Cumberland Island in nearby Camden County, Georgia, tying the Nightingale family to the plantation economies of Georgia's Sea Islands. Before we revisit John Clark Nightingale's departure from Rhode Island to Cumberland Island, I want to share how my own genealogical journey began. It started in 2017, when I had the opportunity to intern at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture under Dr. Kurowski Salter. He was the guest curator for the museum's military history exhibit, Double Victory. That experience was transformative. I spent countless hours exploring the museum's galleries and working in the off-site archival facilities, discovering how history lives both in public exhibits and in collections behind the scenes. A remarkable full circle moment came recently. Dr. Salter, who mentored me during that formative internship, was instrumental in advocating for the Harlem Hellfighters, the legendary Black World War I regiment, to receive a Congressional Gold Medal. That recognition happened just a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., long overdue, and seeing his leadership in that moment reminded me how archival work and public history can shape national memory. My time at Nemoc planted that seed for my own genealogical research. It gave me the tools and inspiration to start asking questions about the Nightingale name and how it connects my family to the histories of slavery, migration, and resilience. One of the most incredible resources at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC is its Family History Center. I believe it's on the 3rd floor. This center, or maybe 2nd floor, this center pairs visitors with professional genealogists who help guide them in starting or advancing their family research. One of the main tools they use is FamilySearch.org, which is free to use and provides access to millions of historical records. I began exploring these resources during my internship at the African American Museum in 2017. That experience gave me not just the curiosity, but also the practical tools to dig into my own family's past. The first breakthrough I had was finding this document that you see here, the World War II draft registration card for my grandfather, Oliver Lewis Nightingale. Even though my grandfather did not serve in the war, the fact that he even filled out this card makes it an important piece of history. Some of the details that stood out to me: his birth date, June 15, 1912. His birthplace, Kingsland, Camden County, Georgia. Had his address on there. His employer, he was a longshoreman, so the employer was a Seaboard Airline, W.M. Warren, in nearby St. Mary's. And the person listed as always knowing his whereabouts, his mother, Henrietta Baker. But the most powerful part for me was seeing his own signature at the bottom of the card. That moment, seeing his handwriting, transformed my understanding of my family history. It wasn't just names and dates anymore. It was something real, something tangible, something personal. This record became the starting point of my genealogical journey, leading me to uncover how the Nightingale name moved from Providence to Cumberland Island, Camden County, and ultimately to my family. The Nightingale lineage in Camden County. So this slide tells the story of my grandfather, Oliver Nightingale, born 1912, passed away 3 years after I was born in 1997, whose roots reach back across 4 generations in Camden County, Georgia, a region on Georgia's southeastern coast, just above the Florida line and near Cumberland Island, an area historically tied to plantation economy. Oliver's father was Abraham Lincoln Nightingale, born 1868. And Abe's father was Tony Nightingale, born 1831. Both were born in Camden County, and Tony lived through slavery and emancipation. On the way here, and this is how this journey works, you just really never know when it'll come. According to a county history book I was literally reading on the way over here, or over to Rhode Island, Tony Nightingale's name appears in the 1877 Camden County Tax Digest just 14 years after the end of slavery, listed alongside other formerly enslaved men who had became property owners and taxpayers. This record, held in the courthouse at Woodbine and on the microfilm at the Georgia State Archives, highlights how Tony and his generation began to establish lives in freedom despite the immense challenges of Reconstruction. Tony married Mary Littlefield, born in 1844, whose family, based on census records, traced its origins to Africa, reflecting the direct link between our lineage and the transatlantic slave trade. There's also a possible, though still unproven, connection worth noting. In the early 1800s, John Clark Nightingale, a descendant of the prominent Rhode Island Nightingale family, moved south to Georgia and acquired plantations near Cumberland Island. We know from Rhode Island's history that many of its merchants and planters were involved in slavery. While I have not yet confirmed it through archival evidence, it is plausible that John Clark Nightingale brought enslaved people with him from Rhode Island to Camden County. This might explain why there's so little documentation of Tony Nightingale's parents in Georgia records. The family's presence there could predate local record keeping, originating in the Rhode Island slave trade. Through these connections, Tony to Abe, to Oliver, to my father, we can see how my family's history intertwines with the larger story of slavery, migration, resilience in the Georgia Lowcountry. And here are my grandparents here, Oliver and Margaret Nightingale. Both have passed away. General Nathaniel Greene, and I think about this slide, it's a different start to America's story. This image is of Nathaniel, or the images you see are of Nathaniel Greene, one of George Washington's most trusted generals during the Revolutionary War. After the war, Greene moved south and became a plantation owner on Cumberland Island, the same region where my father's side of the family has its roots. That shift from a revolutionary leader for independence to a participant in the plantation economy reflects the deep contradictions at the heart of the nation's founding. Every day on my way to work in Washington, D.C., I pass the equestrian statue of Nathaniel Greene in Stanton Park that you see here, near the U.S. Capitol. It's a daily reminder of how our public monuments often celebrate military triumphs and founding ideals while obscuring the realities of slavery that underpin the very society that those figures helped to build. Seeing that statue has changed how I look at D.C. itself. A city filled with monuments, including those honoring figures like Christopher Columbus. Even the name of the capital pays tribute to Columbus, a figure tied to colonization and oppression. For me, these daily reminders reveal a different founding narrative of America, one that isn't just about liberty and independence, but also about slavery, displacement, and the survival of those whose stories were left out of the monuments. By connecting Greene's move to Cumberland Island with my own family's roots in nearby Camden County, I see how my family's story intersects with this broader, more complicated history of America's beginnings. This is Catherine Littlefield Greene, the wife of Nathaniel Greene. After Nathaniel's death in 1786, Catherine Greene inherited his lands on Cumberland Island, becoming a significant landholder in her own right. Her stewardship of the estate is an important part of how the plantation economy continued to grow in the region. Catherine is also remembered for her connection to Eli Whitney, who visited her estate in 1790s. Historians often note that she offered support and encouragement to Whitney as he developed the cotton gin, a device that revolutionized cotton production and tragically deepened the South's reliance on enslaved labor. One detail that stands out for me personally is that Catherine's maiden name was Littlefield. In my own family's history, there are Littlefields in Camden County, Georgia, And while we don't know yet the full nature of that connection, it's a reminder of how intertwined these family names can be across time and place. Finally, it's worth noting that Catherine Green herself had connections to Providence, Rhode Island, which brings this story full circle, linking both the world of northern merchant class to the land and labor of the South. As my genealogical research progressed, I thought I had finally found the key to my family's origins. The Nightingale plantation in South Carolina, which is a picture here that still stands today. On paper, it looked promising. The plantation name matched my family's surname, and for a while, I believed this is where my family's lineage in the United States began. But as I dug deeper into records, census data, property records, and historical maps, it became clear that there was no direct connection between any ancestors in Georgia and the Nightingale family of South Carolina. This moment was both frustrating and instructive. It reminded me that in genealogical work, especially for families descended from enslaved people, names can be misleading. Enslaved individuals were often given the surnames of their enslavers, and those names could shift or be adopted over time for reasons we'll never fully know. This so-called dead end ultimately redirected my research southward to Georgia, to Camden County, and the surrounding Sea Islands, which brought me closer to uncovering my true story, the true story of my family history. After hitting that dead end with the Nightingale plantation in South Carolina, I went back to the basics, Google searches. I started typing in different phrases, things like Nightingale slaves, just to see what might surface. That's when I began seeing hits in Google books that mentioned the Nightingale name in the context of Cumberland Island. Those search results led me to the work of Mary R. Bullard, a historian and descendant of the Carnegie family who owned property and lived on Cumberland Island after the Civil War. Bullard's research, while written from the perspective of a descendant of island elites, turned out to be a crucial resource. Her detailed accounts of Cumberland Island's history provided names, dates, and events that helped me begin to piece together how the Nightingale family became tied to that place. This is Cumberland Island, one of the largest barrier islands off the coast of Georgia. It's a place of incredible nature or natural beauty with untouched beaches, marshlands, maritime forests, wild horses, and rich biodiversity. But beyond the scenery, Cumberland Island is also a land of deep cultural and historical significance. It was once a home to enslaved Africans who worked the plantations here and over generations and developed a distinctive culture known as Gullah Geechee. The term Geechee refers to the descendants of enslaved Africans who lived on the coastal islands and low country regions of Georgia and northern Florida. Because these communities were actively isolated, they retained many West African traditions in language, food, crafts, and spirituality. Today, when we talk about Cumberland Island, we're talking not just about beautiful landscape, but also about a place that embodies the survival and resilience of the Gullah Geechee people. Their culture is deeply tied to this land and continues to shape the identity of the Sea Islands. And so within Mary Bullard's book, she sort of gives a timeline. In 1795, Martha Washington Green married John Clark Nightingale of Rhode Island. This brought the Nightingale name to Georgia. Green estate divisions and wills transferred land and enslaved people to the Nightingales. Phineas Nightingale later inherited Dungeness and Oakland plantations, along with the enslaved people who worked with them. By inheriting both land and enslaved labor, the Nightingales became major plantation owners on Cumberland Island. This photograph shows members of the white Nightingale family in Brunswick in the late 19th century. I'm using it to highlight the contrast between these land-owning Nightingales, descendants of families tied to slavery, and my own ancestors who lived in the same region. The Nightingale name came south when John Clark Nightingale moved from Rhode Island to Cumberland Island in the late 1700s. Through this marriage into the Green family and his involvement in plantation life and slaveholding, the name spread into Camden County, Brunswick, and other surrounding coastal communities. And I'll just read here, it says, Brunswick, 1890s, family gathered for a photograph. Note the dog is included too. Standing left to right, Mary King Nightingale. That PM stands for Phineas Miller, Retta McCullough, Louisa Green Nightingale, Francis Grant, Clifford D. Wayne, Malcolm McCullough, and seated is Elise Wayne, Ethel Wayne, P. Alstone Hazelhurst, Joseph de Binon, and Rock the dog. Even though the name became established in the air, there were not many black families who carried the Nightingale surname. My own family's connection to the name likely stemmed from the period of slavery on plantations in and around Cumberland Island. So in 2017, this is right after my internship in DC, around Christmas time, after years of researching the Nightingale family's history, I decided to take my father to Cumberland Island. We joined the Land and Legacies tour ran by the National Park Service, which now manages much of the island. Other parts are still owned by families like the Rockefellers and the Candlers, the family who owns Coca-Cola, whose wealth is rooted in the plantation area. We stopped at this sign for the Nightingale Trail, a moment that connected our family story to this historic landscape. The Nightingale Trail is a 0.8-mile U-shaped path through the island's Maritime forest, lined with dense saw palmettos and shaded by mature live oaks draped in Spanish moss and muscadine vines. It offers a quiet glimpse of the island's natural beauty and wildlife, including pileated woodpeckers, deer, and armadillo. On the Land and Legacies tour, my father and I visited the First African Baptist Church, a humble one-room building established in 1893 by African-American residents of the island. Some of its founders had been born into slavery and emancipated after the Civil War. The church served as both a place of free worship and a community center for the North End community known as the Settlement. It was rebuilt in the 1930s. While many visitors know it as the site of John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessett's wedding in 1996, its true significance lies in its roots as a praise house for the Gullah Geechee community. The church stands about 15 miles north of the Sea Camp dock and is generally only accessible through the Land and Legacies tour. Today, the doors remain open, but it's unstaffed. And this is coming from some research done by Mary Bullard. And again, this is, no coincidence. I truly believe my ancestors, put me in these places. You talk about early black religious community. The Cumberland African Church, admitted to the Sunbury Baptist Association in 1847, shows that organized black worship in the island predated Cumberland's first African Baptist church. One of the church's delegates was B. Nightingale, the surname I carry today, connecting my own family story to this black religious experience. And this highlights the resilience of enslaved Africans in establishing and sustaining their own sacred spaces, a history I now help to remember and interpret. And so I'll read it here. It says, for the name of church, Sunbury Baptist Association minutes, 1834 to 1864, entry for 1847, the Cumberland African Church applied for admission, which was granted. One of his longtime delegates was a black man named B. Nightingale, elsewhere an unusual surname, but not uncommon on Cumberland Island. And we believe that's Butler Nightingale after doing some further research. The church had 124 African-American members, and it says the author is grateful to the senior archivist at Mercer University. The woman you see here is Beulah Alberti, granddaughter of Primus and Amanda Mitchell, who were enslaved on Cumberland Island and later became founding trustees of the First African Baptist Church. She served as the clerk of the First African Baptist Church, helping to keep the congregation active and organized after Reconstruction. Her well-used Bible, now displayed at the Cumberland Island National Seesaw Museum in St. Mary's, Georgia, symbolizes her lifelong devotion. Continued her family's legacy in the settlement, the historic black community on the island's north end, preserving faith, culture, and continuity for future generations. And Her existence embodies how African American women sustained religious and communal life on Cumberland Island and shaped the island's post-emancipation story. And this is her burial site here. And this is another, I mentioned earlier, Primus Mitchell. This is his burial site here. You'll notice a couple of the conch shells around the site, and I'll get into that in a second. The Green Miller Cemetery. So located near the ruins of Dungeness Estate, this cemetery reflects the plantation era elite who shaped Cumberland Island. It is named for Catherine Green Miller, widow of Revolutionary War hero Nathaniel Green. Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee, a famed Revolutionary War cavalry officer and father of Robert E. Lee, he fell ill while visiting Cumberland Island and died at Dungeness, being buried there for nearly a century before his remains were moved to Virginia. The cemetery includes Martha Green Nightingale, great-granddaughter of Catherine and Nathaniel Green. Her presence reflects the marriage that tied the Nightingale family to the Green lineage and to the plantation society on the island. The graves here tell the story of the early 19th century life on Cumberland. Planter families like the Greens, Millers, and Nightingales who relied on the labor of hundreds of enslaved people to sustain the island's cotton community. And the woman you see here is Chiefess Marquetta Goodwine, or she's known as the Queen Quet of the Gullah Geechee Nation. I met Queen Quet, chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation, while speaking at the Keeping History Above Water Conference in Flagler College in 2019. She was one of the first people to tell me that I truly had something with my research, recognizing its value for understanding Gullah Geechee heritage. Queen Quet and her team helped steer me onto this path of connecting the dots between the history of the Black press, my family's genealogy, and the broader story of the African descendant communities along the Southeast coast. And from there, I kept going with the University of South Carolina. Who you see here is Dr. Kelly Goldberg, archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. In 2019, she started a project, and I joined on in 2020 as a consultant and oral historian, a project linking African American history to Cumberland Island seashore. The project seeks to research and compile resources that supported interpretive and educational programs at Cumberland Island, helping visitors connect with the African American heritage that shaped the island and the surrounding region. This work gave me the chance to dive deeper into the Black life on and around the island, amplifying stories that had long been underrepresented. Although many studies have examined Cumberland Island, there remains a need to highlight the unique experience of Africans and African Americans who live there. As a protected national park landscape, Cumberland Island offers a unique opportunity for heritage preservation and deeper historical investigation. And this is the timeline here for the project. A few of the goals, one of the main goals we had was identifying and interviewing descendants of African American residents and employees of Cumberland Island, generating an annotated bibliography of archival repositories and key sources relating to pertinent history. And then the final goal was to investigate the history of the brick kiln area. You can see some more of the chimneys there, the slave chimneys there. And I want to shout out the National Park Service staff. This was during COVID. As you can see the mask there, and they were amazing. I mean, anything I asked for, they were taking me to. They took me to the archives, took me to the island multiple times. Just amazing staff for the National Park Service. And so the slave chimneys and conch shells. These brick chimneys that you see are among the few above-ground remains of the homes of enslaved Africans who lived and worked on Cumberland Island's plantations. The conch shells. Archaeologists discovered conch shells placed on or near the chimneys. These were not random artifacts. They carry cultural and historical meaning. Conch shells are often associated with West African traditions, symbolizing communication with the ancestors, spirituality, and protection of the home. Their placement on chimneys may reflect how enslaved people retained and adapted African cultural practices in the face of enslavement. Together, the chimneys and the shells provide a tangible link to the daily lives, resilience, and cultural continuity of Africans and African Americans on the island. And from there, I kept going. While visiting the archives on Cumberland Island, on the mainland, and this is why I said the ancestors just guide this journey. As soon as we walk in, look over to the right, I see my grandfather's name on a piece of paper. The National Park Service interviewed him in 1995. This would have been a year after I was born, at his home in Kingsland, Georgia. And they actually included the house here, a picture of the house. My father often spoke about this house. This is the one that he grew up in. In the interview, he recalls working on Cumberland Island, something I did not know. I don't know who else knew in my family, but it didn't get to me. From 1934 to 1936, he hauled lumber, building fences and roads during general cleanup. He worked under Frank McLaren, overseer for Lucy and Morris Carnegie. He lived during the week in large dormitories near Dungeness, Grayfield, and Plum Orchard, and then rode the ferry back to St. Mary's on Saturdays. He remembered co-workers like Reese Morris, William Fields, Peter Baker, George Morrow, Beulah Alberti, who I mentioned earlier. He described evenings spent playing cards in the dormitory and visiting the Carnegie House. Again, he spoke about Beulah, who cooked for workers, showing how settlement communities supported each other. Now, the transcriber noted that it was hard to understand the interview because of his broken English, as they said. But really what it was that Gullah Geechee dialect. And I picked up on it, and we retranscribed it and gave that to the National Park Service. It was during the trip to Cumberland Island with the National Park Service that I did with Dr. Kelly Goldberg and her class. I was able to play my grandfather's interview as I walked on the roads of Cumberland Island. I heard him talk about how he helped pave the roads. I walked in his footsteps. The place that we stayed, that they housed us, was the place that he would have laid his head, because the place that they had us stay was where they had the black workers work on the roads, and they would spend the night in those quarters. So I actually stayed where my grandfather likely would have stayed. And it was listening to his recording while walking the island that made the stories about the landscape come alive. And then we took it even further, began to do interviews. This is Mabel Johnson. She shared memories of visiting Cumberland Island as a child. She recalled attending funerals on the island with her family, describing the experiences of taking the ferry across the water to reach the island. Her story offers a glimpse into the community connections between the mainland and the settlement on Cumberland Island. And this preserves an important layer of cultural memory tied to rituals of life and death on the island. And then I took it even further. The person you see here is Brailsford Troop Nightingale Jr. We met in Brunswick, Georgia, and this was a person I believe to be a direct descendant of the white Nightingales, the slave-owning branch of the family. His three names, Brailsford Troop Nightingale, are all surnames tied to prominent slave-owning families in Georgia's coastal plantations. We agreed to meet at Elizabethville Plantation, a former rice plantation along the Altamaha River, a fitting yet sobering location for this conversation. Troop has been the only white Nightingale willing to meet with me, and we later found out he was adopted. We exchanged books and documents, sharing our research and talking about reparations and very different legacies. Troop upholds his family's slave-owning heritage. Well, me, I'm the keeper of my family's legacy, descendants of the enslaved. He took me and my father to Selden Park where my father remembered swimming and getting haircuts as a boy. We ended the visit at the city cemetery where Troop showed us his family's Confederate-era burial plots, many marked with CSA for Confederate States of America. Standing there, I felt an absence of my own ancestral burial grounds, unable to show where my enslaved forebears rest, a moment of grief and reflection. So we kept going. After leaving Brunswick and my encounter with Troop Nightingale, I felt a renewed sense of anger and determination. I wanted to understand more and more about my family's history, especially about the generations before my grandfather. One of the first clues I uncovered was the death certificate of my grandfather's brother, Alvin Nightingale. On this document, which dates June 10, 1939, Alvin is listed as a laborer born 1894 in Camden County, Georgia, the same county where my family has deep roots going back to the 19th century. What struck me was the line at the bottom of the certificate, which is right here. It said, "Place of burial, Holzendorf Cemetery." Now, this small detail connected Alvin's life and death to a much larger historical story. It led me to research the Holzendorf family, prominent landholders and enslavers in the Camden County area. Through that lead, I discovered records of the Bernie plantation, owned by John Lewis Lake Holzendorf. His descendants. This plantation sat along the Crooked River in Camden County, and by 1850 was the home to 39 enslaved people. By 1860, that number had grown to 41. In the Lang archives in Camden County, I found an 1855 ledger from Bernie Plantation that detailed the daily work schedule of the enslaved. This record connected my family story through Alvin's final resting place to the very soil worked by enslaved ancestors. So these are baptism records from the Holzendorf Plantation in 1871. Records from 1871 at the Holzendorf Plantation in Camden County showed the names Tony and Mary Nightingale's children, Abraham, Abe Nightingale, age 3 at the time, Laura Nightingale, age 8, and it confirms the presence of the Nightingale family on the plantation after the Civil War. So we took it further. After getting through that baptism record and a lot of digging, again, I was with an archaeologist from the University of South Carolina, we located the historic Bernie plantation that you see right here. Or excuse me, yeah, the plantation and then also the cemetery, the Holzendorf Cemetery. Now part of the Camden County Hunting Club. This was right near Kinlaw Cemetery, which is where my grandparents are buried. And we spent the day walking in the footsteps of my ancestors, trying to find this space. And then we took it further, and I have a deep love for newspapers. Again, I oversee the digitization at Howard of the black newspapers, and we're making that accessible to the world for free. This newspaper clipping here from the Tribune in Georgia, published in February 25th, 2000, tells a powerful story about the Holzendorf Cemetery. It says, for decades, a historic black burial ground had been overgrown and neglected. Graves were hidden under the tree roots and brush. Some headstones had sunk so deep into the earth that they were nearly lost. What finally brought change was the persistence of descendants, and this was in 2000. Under Sheriff Bill Smith, and they had inmate crews clear the land and expose long buried stones and restored the site's dignity. And this was 2000. And so in true fashion, my father, we were talking about this, he called to the sheriff's office repeatedly until eventually they agreed to clean up the property as they did in 2000. And so here's a picture of some of the cemetery cleared off. You can see a lot of the trees have been cut down, and we were able to get a lot of pictures of some of those headstones and take a lot of pictures. You can see some of the crosses Those crosses were planted in 2000 when they revitalized the site in 2000. And this episode reminds us that preservation of African American burial grounds often depended on a combination of community advocacy, family persistence, and the written record, in this case, the local newspaper, to make history visible again. What I did not mention is that that newspaper article states that there were over 2,000 formerly enslaved bodies in that cemetery. My search for the Nightingale story has taken me down many rabbit holes, and I continue to go down them. I've had international leads. I remember going to the UK and finding a Nightingale Lane and Nightingale Square, and there was a Nightingale restaurant. Sat down with the owner. There was probably no connection, but he didn't even know how the place got its name. He assumed it was by some birds. And my research continues. It always continues. In this journey, as I said, I was reading something on the way here and found some more clues to help make this presentation. My relationship with the National Park Service has grown. Anytime I want to get out there and do some research, they open the doors with open arms. And then I've been able to present some of this research at conferences, including the African American Historical Genealogical Society, which I'm a member of in DC. And it gets deep. Some of the rabbit holes are actually kind of fun. I'm not gonna lie. These 3 pictures here sort of paint that picture. So I'll start first with notable tennis player Althea Gibson. Now, while I was at Bethune-Cookman, I ran into a lot of people, and Althea Gibson had her own day at Bethune-Cookman. Mary McLeod Bethune invited her out. I forget what year, but it was in the yearbook. And so it was a woman who was doing research for an author who was doing a book on Althea Gibson. And I got her to scan and send it, and she was happy. And then the author bypassed the researcher and contacted me and said, "Your last name Nightingale, do you know a Gloria Nightingale?" I said, "No, I don't." I asked my father. He said he kind of remembers a name of a Gloria Nightingale, but we couldn't make a connection. What we ended up finding out was that Althea Gibson lived with a group of Black Nightingales in New York. And there was a woman by the name of Gloria Nightingale who played on her basketball team as a child. And there's newspaper articles of that team going around whooping on all the other girls in the city. And it actually said in one of the articles that Gloria Nightingale was destined for success, not knowing who Althea Gibson was. And then there's the middle picture. And this one really hits home. The gentleman you see here is Elton Nightingale, Tuskegee Airman, and you can look up his name and look at all his accomplishments. But this one hits home for me because my parents graduated from Tuskegee University. That's where they met, and eventually fell in love, and had 2 kids, me and my brother. And still no connection. My parents weren't able to point me in the right direction. But he looks like somebody that might be in my family. But again, another rabbit hole that, nothing was there. And I believe his family originated out of New York also, too. There was some origins in New York, too. And I couldn't make the connection between him and Gloria Nightingale either. And then the woman in the middle here is Marjorie Nightingale. Now, at the time, and this was, years ago, I moved to D.C. in 2022, I was anybody with the last name Nightingale. I was on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. If I saw you were a Black Nightingale, I was contacting you, just to see if there was some kind of connection, because that's how passionate I was at the time. And we talked, and she actually had already traced her family lineage, and we didn't see a connection. However, when I moved to the DMV, she took me in like I was family because we shared that last name. She invited me to cookouts introduced me to her daughter and her boyfriend at the time. She's a sex therapist in the DMV, but we still keep in contact to this day. And so this is just an example of some of the rabbit holes I can kind of get lost in on this journey. Have no connection that I know of, but the common theme here is that last name, Nightingale. And so as I wrap this up and I reflect on the journey, I want to thank everyone who helped make this talk possible. The organizers, the scholars, and my family, and the many people who shared their stories and opened doors for me. Moving forward, my mission is twofold: to uncover whether John Clark Nightingale, who moved from Rhode Island to Georgia in the late 1700s, brought enslaved people with him, and whether that history links my ancestors in Camden County to the Nightingales of Providence. And just as importantly, to help recover and tell the stories of the more than 2,000 people buried at Hosendorf Cemetery, so their lives and legacies will not be forgotten. Thank you for your time.
I think we may have a question. And I want to remind everyone that when we conclude here, that away is the reception. Please do join us and shake Brandon's hand in the reception.
Okay. We have one question. I'm a little short of Peter. You have me very interested in my family roots in Cumberland. Where should I stay when I visit?
So yeah, I think I was telling Tracy about that. So, I've been trying to get my family to, do some kind of family reunion out there. And whenever we would go, because you have to take the ferry to get out there, unless you have a private boat. Anytime I was on that boat, I was the only black person on that ferry. And I've been numerous amounts of times going back and forth. And that's a tough question because the National Park Service provided us with a place to stay while I was out there doing research. And actually, when I went in 2017 with my father, they told us you could do research at Cumberland Island and you could stay there for free. And that stuck with me. And who would have known 5 years later I would have been doing research at the place that my grandfather laid his head. But it's a tricky situation because there's hotels on the island, but they're owned by some of those slave-holding family names. The Grayfield Plantation, I know, and about half of the island is actually owned by the Rockefellers and the Carnegie family, two very, very wealthy families. And they've kind of drawn the line between, hey, don't cross this line. So the only way you can really get out there is if you camp, out there or you're doing research, unless you want to stay at the Grayfield Inn or whatever the name is. So I would suggest, getting in contact with the National Park Service because they do have lodging and they've let other folks stay there, in different situations and scenarios because we weren't the first to go there and do research. So I definitely suggest going to visit and taking one of the Land and Legacy tours so you can get a feel for the island and see some of the wildlife. So I hope that answers the question there.
Thank you again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.